A very good morning to you all and welcome to my presentation. Today I'm going to trace the development of translanguaging from its origin in bilingual education to its recent applications in second language acquisition, TESOL, and then I'm going to re-examine current translation teaching methods through the lens of the translanguaging approach to multilingual education. So the term translanguaging was first introduced by Colin Baker in the mid-1990s as the English equivalent of the Welsh term trawsieithu, which first appeared in an unpublished PhD thesis authored by Ken Williams in the 1980s. Now, trawsieithu means receiving information through the medium of one language, for instance, reading a letter, a newspaper article, or an information leaflet, and responding to it through the medium of another language, for instance, by summarizing it in Welsh. Trawsieithu continues to be used to this date in bilingual education in Wales. It is, for example, a component of the advanced level Welsh written exam, which requires that students read a topical article in English and write a letter in response to it in Welsh. Now, Ken Williams's conceptualization of translanguaging as a pedagogical theory focuses on a child's balanced development of two languages. As Williams explains, translanguaging is a natural skill for any actively bilingual individual. It entails dual language cognitive processing of a message concept and enables the stronger language to reinforce the weaker one. In the Welsh education system, the goal is to strengthen and use both languages to a high level in order to develop balanced and confident bilingual pupils. The aim is to form, in other words, emergent bilinguals so that they become expert bilinguals. Now, secondary school teachers in Wales use translanguaging in a natural and effective manner for simultaneously developing and reinforcing the first and second language, as well as deepening understanding of the subjects taught in the school curriculum. So the aim of bilingual education, at least in Wales, is to learn two languages to a high level and to learn in two languages. And within this holistic language development framework, Ken Williams makes the following recommendations. First of all, receiving information in one language and then using it in another gives pupils an opportunity to digest information more fully. Secondly, using and perfecting translanguaging skills should be encouraged. And thirdly, by developing two-way translanguaging, for instance, from Welsh to English as well as from English to Welsh, teachers and pupils would be better able to take advantage of the best resources in both languages. I will now move on from the vision promoted by Ken Williams, the coiner of the term trawsieithu, to the development of this vision by Colin Baker, the coiner of the English equivalent, translanguaging. He launched the term internationally in the third edition of Foundations of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism. Now, Baker focuses on the importance of translanguaging as a pedagogical practice and discusses four educational advantages. In his view, translanguaging as a pedagogical practice may promote a deeper and fuller understanding of the subject content. It may also help the development of the weaker language. It may also facilitate home-school links and cooperation. And fourthly, It may help the integration of fluent speakers with early learners. Baker believes that translanguaging is the process of making meaning, shaping experiences, gaining understanding and knowledge through the use of two languages. And then, together with his colleagues Wynne Lewis and Bryn Jones, he applies this general definition to bilingual pedagogy and puts forward this general concept. In the classroom, translanguaging tries to draw on all the linguistic resources of the child to maximize understanding and achievement. Thus, both languages are used in a dynamic and functionally integrated manner to organize and mediate mental processes in understanding, speaking, literacy, and not least, learning. Now, this conceptualization goes beyond traditional additive bilingualism, which posits that bilinguals add up to autonomous languages. It underscores instead the very nature of how a bilingual thinks, understands, and achieves. It also stresses bilingual processes in learning rather than just the outcomes of bilingual education. Now, beyond academia, in a discussion paper on developing dual literacy published by Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Education and Training in Wales, translanguaging skills are considered to be part of dual literacy. And by dual literacy is meant the ability to speak, listen, write easily in both L1 and L2 together, with the added ability to move confidently and smoothly between languages for different purposes. Now, empirical evidence of the application of this pedagogic strategy is gradually being collected through field research. In a study carried out in a bilingual primary school classroom composed of L1 and L2 Welsh pupils, aged 7 to 9 years old, the geography teacher was observed asking the class to read together information in English on fair trade on the internet. The pupils were then questioned in English about the meanings of terms such as crops, harvested, chemicals, and the pupils responded in either Welsh or English. The teacher provided an explanation for certain terms in Welsh, for example, the Welsh equivalent of environment, community, and then he or she summarized the reading work in Welsh before asking all pupils to complete a poster in Welsh to explain why supporting fair trade was a good idea. Now, in a larger scale investigation carried out from December 2007 to February 2010, Lewis, Jones and Baker observed 100 lessons in a sample of 29 schools selected from a population of 518 primary and secondary schools throughout Wales. Translanguaging was found in approximately a third of all the 100 bilingual lessons and across all age groups, including the oldest children. In this study, it was, by way of example, the researchers report that 10, 11-year-old students watched an English medium DVD, discussed the content in Welsh, and completed written work in Welsh. And then the teacher deliberately used translanguaging to enable language development in both Welsh and English, as well as to optimize cognitive development and content learning. Moreover, and interestingly, in many cases, students used both languages spontaneously to increase comprehension and improve performance. For instance, they completed a written task in Welsh by using the internet in English. Also, the study revealed that translanguaging was predominantly found in arts and humanities lessons, rather than in the teaching of mathematics, science, and the more practical areas of the curriculum. Now, since the mid-1990s, in the Welsh context, translanguaging has been posited as a natural skill of any bilingual individual, and this is termed universal translanguaging. It has also been posited as an effective learning and teaching strategy in bilingual education, and this is known as classroom translanguaging. Now, classroom translanguaging is further subdivided into two models: teacher-directed translanguaging, a planned and structured activity by the teacher, and pupil-directed translanguaging, whereby translanguaging activities are undertaken independently by more competent bilinguals who are able to work independently and usually choose how to complete the translanguaging activity. Now, moving on from translanguaging in Wales to bilingual education worldwide, the educationalist Ofelia Garcia at City University of New York defines translanguaging as an approach to bilingualism that is centered not on language, as has been often the case, but on the practices of bilinguals that are readily observable. These multiple discursive practices in which bilinguals engage in order to make sense of the bilingual world are seen as the normal mode of communication in bilingual families and communities worldwide. Moreover, as a pedagogical approach, translanguaging is defined as a process which students and teachers engage in complex discursive practices that include all the language practices of students in order to develop new language practices and sustain old ones, communicate appropriate knowledge, and give voice to new socio-political realities by interrogating linguistic inequality. So, according to Garcia, translanguaging is a manifestation of dynamic bilingualism, which, unlike additive bilingualism or parallel monolingualisms, posits that there is one linguistic system, one semiotic repertoire that is always activated. Now, the theory of language inherent in this conceptualization of translanguaging is ecologically oriented and conceived within an action-based sociocultural perspective. As Leo van Leer explains, language is meaning-making activity that takes place in a complex network of complex systems that are interwoven amongst themselves, as well as with all aspects of physical, social, and symbolic worlds. It is not immune to social, political, and economic influences, and it harbors misconceptions with the same ease as wisdoms. It follows that language learning involves meaningful participation in human events, which in turn involves perception, action, and joint construction of meaning. In the classroom context, this language as action perspective means that learners engage in meaningful activities, projects, presentations, investigations that engage their interest and that encourage language growth through perception, interaction, planning, research, discussion, and co-construction of academic products of various kinds. During such action-based work, language development occurs when it is carefully scaffolded by the teacher as well as by the students working together. Now, consonant with the proposition that translanguaging is the enactment of dynamic bilingualism is the view put forward by Angela Kreis and Adrian Blackledge that translanguaging involves practicing flexible bilingualism in classroom language ecologies. As Blackledge et al. Explain, flexible bilingualism represents a view of language as a social resource without clear boundaries, which places the speaker at the heart of the interaction. And this leads us away from a focus on language as distinct codes to a focus on the agency of individuals engaging in using, creating and interpreting science of communication, end of quote. Now, in 2002, Blackledge and Crease in the School of Education at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom began to investigate the multilingual practices of students and teachers in Bengali, Chinese, Gujarati and Turkish complementary schools in Birmingham, Manchester, Leicester and London. Complementary schools in the UK are established by community members and run by volunteers outside the state sector. They focus on language, culture and heritage teaching. Framed within an ecological perspective of multilingualism, the research endeavour aimed at exploring the social, cultural and linguistic significance of complementary schools and the ways in which linguistic practices are used to negotiate multilingual and multicultural identities. In complementary schools, students' English proficiency is generally greater than their community language proficiency, whereas teachers' command of the community language is better compared with English. Now, two interesting case studies of two Gujarati and two Chinese schools are described in detail in Crease and Blackledge in 2010. The data collected for the first study consists of one extract from the audio transcripts of an assembly held at the Yalaram Bal Vikasma in Leicester and two extracts from the audio transcripts of a lesson taught in a different Gujarati school. Now, in the first school, assemblies take place every Saturday morning. They are attended by teachers, parents and pupils. And the analysis of one of the assembly speeches given by the head teacher revealed the simultaneous use of English and Gujarati to convey different pieces of information and engage her bilingual audience. Indeed, both languages were needed to understand the full message. Translanguaging, as Crease and Blackledge observe, was used to make meaning, transmit information and perform identities to connect with the audience in community engagement. The data collected for the second case study consists of three extracts from lessons taught in Mandarin and Cantonese complementary schools in Manchester. In the first extract, the teacher narrated and explained a folk story alternating Mandarin to tell the tale and English to explain the storyline and emphasize the tale's moral. As with the earlier Gujarati examples, both languages were needed to understand what the teacher was saying. Also, students moved freely between languages to question and challenge the events narrated in the tale, which they found implausible. And so they displayed linguistic knowledge and distance from the folk story message. Now, the other extracts show the teacher using a translanguaging technique known as label quests. This is used to introduce new Mandarin words that later appear in the dialogue to be read to the class by a pair of students. So the new word is given in one language and explained in the other. Label quests are also initiated by students, as shown by the data from the Cantonese school. Now, another ethnographic study of a complementary school that is worth mentioning is again described in Blackledge et al. In a recent study published in 2014. It is part of a research project entitled Investigating Discourses of Inheritance and Identity in 4 Multilingual European Settings. It was carried out between 2010 and 2011 in Birmingham, Copenhagen, Stockholm and Tilburg. The goal was to investigate the range of the language and literary practices of multilingual young people, the social and cultural significance of these practices, and how they are used to negotiate inheritance and identities. The analysis of a 48-minute lesson taught in a Punjabi school in Birmingham, together with data collected at home in other environments, revealed that the easy, free movement across permeable linguistic boundaries was the norm. Now, the field research conducted by Blackledge and Creased has paved the way for a new 4-year project entitled Translation and Translanguaging, Investigating Linguistic and Cultural Transformations in Super Diverse Wards in 4 UK cities. The research programme has been awarded a large grant as part of the AHRC Translating Culture Themes and will be complemented in 2018. It will provide detailed ethnographic evidence of how people communicate across languages and cultures in changing urban communities. The goal of this interdisciplinary project is to develop new understandings of multilingual interaction in contexts as varied as business, legal advice, community, sport, libraries and museums in the cities of Birmingham, Cardiff, Leeds and London. Another important European initiative is the International Conference on Translanguaging, Practices, Skills and Pedagogy. It will be held on the 20th to the 22nd April 2015 at Dalarna University Falun in Sweden. It's interesting to read the call for papers, which states, Translanguaging as practices will focus on what students and teachers do with languages, their understanding of languages and their perceptions of languages. Translanguaging as skills will focus on multilingual proficiencies that become visible in naturally occurring interaction among people in settings where multiple languages or varieties are used simultaneously. Translanguaging as pedagogy will focus on the inclusion of multilingual languages or varieties in educational settings and the interrelation between language and learning. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, Ofelia Garcia, together with other scholars, has continued to develop the concept of translanguaging, theoretically, empirically, and pedagogically. As we saw earlier, translanguaging is framed within a dynamic bilingual model which posits that there is but one linguistic system with features that are integrated throughout. So a dynamic bilingual approach sets aside the social construct of the autonomous language and replaces it with the notion of translanguaging, acknowledging the emergence of a single bilingual complex repertoire. The web metaphor is used to give a sense of what dynamic bilingual model means. And I quote, multilingual individuals do not have languages, rather they have an interconnected whole, an ecosystem of mutual interdependence, of possibly heteronamed linguistic features forming a single web, where translanguaging is the speech product generated by the web. As regards empirical research, Ofelia Garcia and Li Wei report on 2 case studies that illustrate how translanguaging is used naturally by students in the classroom. And this is what Williams refers to as natural translanguaging, which occurs orally and in the written mode to develop and maintain bilingual proficiency. Lewis et al. Call this phenomenon pupil-directed translanguaging. Now, the first case study, carried out by Garcia and Li Wei, shows how young English-Spanish bilingual kindergarteners at different levels of their bilingual development use their entire language repertoire and multimodal semiotic system in order to fulfill 6 metafunctions. The first one is to mediate understandings among each other. The second one, to construct meaning of what the other is saying. The third one, to construct meaning within themselves. The fourth, to include others. The fifth, to exclude others. And the last one, to demonstrate knowledge. Different case studies have been carried out. I think I will summarize some of the major results. I think I'll quote in detail this study because of its relevance for translation. This study examines the translanguaging strategies used by 10 Japanese American students of middle school and high school age, attending a course on academic essay writing for the Scholastic Achievement Test, the so-called SAT. This is required for admission in American universities. The course was taught privately by Naomi Kano in one of the students' home over a 6-month period. The syllabus design adopted a translanguaging pedagogy and followed 3 steps detailed in an article authored by Ofelia Garcia and Naomi Kano. These are the steps. Students read bilingual texts on the topic about which they were assigned to write. These bilingual texts were presented side by side, or there was an English text coupled with a parallel translation in Japanese, or a set of English and Japanese texts about the same subject, but not parallel translations. In the second step, students discussed the bilingual readings mostly in Japanese. And in the third and final step, students wrote an essay in English on the topic of the bilingual reading and the discussion in Japanese about the readings. A stimulated recall technique was used to elicit the students' perceptions of translanguaging as pedagogy and as a learning strategy. This technique involved videotaping portions of translanguaging enriched instruction and then interviewing the students in Japanese about what they were thinking and doing during the task that was videotaped. The analysis of the interviews showed that translanguaging enables students to move back and forth their entire linguistic and discursive repertoire, playing an important role in the development of metalinguistic and metacognitive awareness. Now, while the emergent bilinguals use translanguaging as support and sometimes to expand their understandings, the experienced bilinguals consciously use translanguaging for their own enhancement. That is to say, to bolster and enrich their bilingual abilities, demonstrating their greater autonomy and ability to self-regulate the development of either language. Now, since time is pressing, I will move on now on the recommendations made by Garcia on the basis of the empirical evidence collected so far. She puts forward a pedagogy for schools which has the following goals. 1. To differentiate among students' levels and adapt instruction to different types of students in multilingual classrooms. 2. To build background knowledge so that students can make meaning of the content being taught and of the ways of languaging in the lesson. 3. To deepen understandings and socio-political engagement. 4. Cross-linguistic, metalinguistic awareness so as to strengthen the students' ability to meet the communicative exigencies of the socio-educational situation. 5. Cross-linguistic flexibility so as to use language practices competently. 6. Identity investment and positionalities, that is, learners' engagement. And 7. To interrogate linguistic inequality and disrupt linguistic hierarchies and social structures. And for each of the above teaching objectives, the following possible translanguaging strategies are proposed. For Goal 1, translation. For Goal 2, collaborative dialogue and grouping, reading multilingual texts, multilingual listening and visual resources, project learning, thematic units and research. For Goal 3, all of the above, and inner speech, multilingual writing. For Goal 4, word walls, sentence starters, cognates, comparing multilingual texts, multilingual vocabulary inquiry, multilingual syntax and morphological inquiry. Goal 5, alternating languages and media, translating, translanguaging in writing, translanguaging in speaking. And for Goal 6 and 7, all of the above techniques. Now, finally, Garcia and Li Wei discuss the implications of translanguaging for teacher education and report on a project undertaken in the City University of New York State. It is called CUNY NISIEB. The initiative endorses the view that translanguaging is the discursive norm of all bilinguals as well as a pedagogical theory of learning and teaching. At the heart of the CUNY NISIEB vision are the principles that bilingualism has to be used as a resource in education, and a multilingual ecology has to be supported not only for emergent bilinguals, but for all students in the school. The project has published Translanguaging, a CUNY NISIEB guide for educators. It offers elementary, middle and secondary school teachers practical assistance on how to use translanguaging to help facilitate more effective learning of content and language by bilingual students. Since 2012, several CUNY NISIEB schools have adopted the multilingual approach promoted by this collaborative initiative and implemented significant changes, as shown by many examples reported in a volume edited by Garcia and Li Wei. Now, having surveyed the field of pedagogical translanguaging in a variety of educational contexts, the question that arises is, what can we give to and take from this ecologically oriented and multilingual approach to language education, given our scholarly interests in translation in second language teaching, multilingualism, migration, globalization, and minority? And in order to address this issue, I propose, first of all, that the term translanguaging be introduced in the discipline and become an object of study in its own right. Translation studies would thus be marked on the map drawn by the disciplines that concern themselves with the conceptual development and empirical investigation of this communicative practice and pedagogy. In accord with this recommendation, I will now re-examine current translation teaching methods within the multilingual perspective espoused by the translanguaging approach. Now, first I briefly outline the scope of research into translator training, and then I analyze the place and role of translanguaging in translation pedagogy. In his famous paper, The Name and the Nature of Translation Studies, presented at the Third World Congress of Applied Linguistics, the Amsterdam-based American literary translator and theorist James S. Holmes outlined the scope and structure of the field of research concerned with the description, theory, and praxis of translation. You will recall that in James Holmes' framework, the domain of applied translation studies includes translator training, translation aids, translation policy, and translation criticism. And since the mid-1990s, Translator training has been a much investigated area of applied translation studies, as testified by the growing number of publications ranging from handbooks for translator trainers and practical courses in translation to scholarly individual monographs, collective volumes and academic articles. Moreover, in 2007, an international refereed journal, The Interpreter and Translator Trainer, began to publish research that focuses on the training of translators and interpreters. The present analysis focuses on two aspects of translator training, namely curriculum planning and teaching methods. Now, as regards curricular design, Dorothy Kelly suggests that independent of its format, the overall outcome of a translator training program should be formulated from the perspective of the student. As she explains, on completion of the course, students will have acquired the necessary set of competencies, knowledge, skills, and attitudes to be able to join the translation profession in any of its specialized area in this country or abroad at a junior level. Now, within a general competence-based student-centered perspective, the curricular design process for translator training programs starts from the institutional and social context in which training takes place. Then, on the basis of the input given by the profession, as well as society and the disciplines involved, social and market needs are identified and aims and intended outcomes are formulated. And then there are other steps: identify student profile and needs, design overall course content and structure, identify resources available and acquire those needed, design teaching and learning activities, design assessment activities, design course evaluation instruments, implementation of course and its evaluation, and finally, quality enhancement, which consists of incorporating into the program the improvements identified during the evaluation process. Now, as regards the intended outcomes, the curricular design for translator training programs aims to develop translation-specific professional competencies. And these skills, which make up translator competence, as summarized by Kelly as follows: communicative and textual competence in at least 2 languages and cultures, cultural and intercultural competence, subject area competence, professional and instrumental competence, psychophysiological or attitudinal competence, interpersonal competence, and strategic competence. This includes organizational and planning skills, problem identification and problem solving, monitoring, self-assessment, and revision. Now, communicative and textual competence and cultural and intercultural competence are closely related. The former consists of active and passive skills in 2 languages involved, awareness of textuality in discourse, cultural, textual, and discourse conventions. Now, the translation competence model proposed by Kelly is largely consistent with other models elaborated and implemented in Europe, namely the PACTE research project and the EMT, the Masters in Translation Expert Group. And against this background, Margherita Ulrich in 2005 conducted a survey to assess the state of the art in translation training in a cross-section of the leading and recognized higher education institutions in Europe, United States, Canada, Brazil, and Israel. A questionnaire consisting of 12 sections relating to different aspects of curricular design was sent to 65 institutions and 41 responded. As far as course content is concerned, the results of the survey shows a general consensus on what are considered to be translation activities. And these are translation into L1, translation into L2, Technical writing and editing are also regarded as activities that meet both professional and academic criteria. Moreover, the majority of the responding institutions regarded written composition in L1 and L2, reading comprehension, text analysis, summary writing, multiple choice and closed text as activities falling within the territory of language classes. So these results show a general consensus on distinguishing translation activities from language activities. And this is being upheld also by Dorothy Kelly, who considers that language classes should not be confused with translation classes. Now, in the following section, I will illustrate how this neat division between language and translation teaching is implemented in 2 undergraduate degree programs in Germany and Spain, respectively. Now, the German example is detailed by Christiane Nord. She describes the curricular design adopted in the 4-year program for specialized communication at the University of Applied Sciences in Magdeburg-Stendal in Germany. The goal of this program is to form what Nord calls a functional translator whose competencies overlap with those identified in the literature and also summarized by Kelly and also expressed by the EMT expert group and also the PACTE project. Let's summarize these characteristics of a functional translator. Who is expected to know source and target text and with their communicative functions. Also, situational and cultural factors influence text production. Communicative conflicts may arise and need to be solved without taking sides. Similar structures in languages are not always used with the same frequency in the same situations. It is also crucial to have excellent writing abilities. Traditional and modern translation aids have to be used effectively. It is important to acquire subject-specific knowledge and research competencies. It is necessary to be able to deal with the pressure of working at a fast pace and cost effectively. And finally, translators need to develop self-assurance and self-confidence, and these are valuable assets in their training. Now, an important aspect of the training advocated by Norm is the use of contrastive style analysis, which fosters contrastive text competence. That is to say, the ability to analyze the culture-specific features of textual and other communicative conventions in the 2 cultures. And the activities that enable learners to develop contrastive text competence are comparisons of comparable texts originally written in different languages, rewriting text for various audiences, purposes, media and places, summarizing long text, revising and paraphrasing. And she also provides a full list of suggested exercises. I will not go through the entire list, but it's quite evident that all these activities fall within the realm of translanguaging. Now, in Spain, the goals of translator training programs are very similar to those outlined and advocated by Christiane Nord. And I am referring here to Spanish undergraduate translation programs that last 4 years. Now, the subjects taught in the first 2 years are language A, that is to say native languages, language B or C, foreign languages, C, translation from B languages into the chosen A language, and background subjects such as Introduction to Translation Theory or Computer Skills applied to translation. And then in the third year, different types of specialized translation are introduced, such as dubbing, subtitling, scientific, legal, commercial, or literary. And translation from language C begins in the third year together with the study of terminology. And in the fourth and last year, students follow one of two pathways, translation or interpreting. The course content includes language work aimed at improving proficiency in the source and the target language, subject-specific knowledge and terminology management, translation skills, resourcing skills, computer skills, and professional skills, including translators' rights, contracts, and payments. Now, the content of a language course is defined in the first two stages of BB's syllabus design. Stage 1 involves the creation of a translation-based pre-syllabus, which sets the learning objectives and takes into account, first of all, the abilities that constitute translator competence. And this model fully draws on the research model of competencies developed by PACTI. Now, I will now move on to the teaching method outlined by Bibi within this context. She uses multiple translation of the original text in order to develop a multilingual competence in all the working languages of the translator trainees. Now, there is similarity between Christiane Nord's model and Bibi's model, which is task-based, which is based on the principle of task-based language teaching methodology. Here are the similarities. They both endorse the principle that language learning for translators and translation learning should be kept separate to some extent as regards the sequencing of course content and the design of pedagogic activities within curriculum. And also the proposed learning and teaching activities are arranged in the same order. Monolingual exercises precede bilingual activities. Instead, the methodology proposed by Maria Gonzalez Davis seamlessly combines language and translation teaching in the same classroom. Gonzalez Davis' task-based learning approach draws on humanistic teaching principles, communicative language teaching, cooperative learning, and social constructivism. It is essentially student-centered, and the design of a teaching method brings together the notion of translation as a pedagogical tool and the notion of translation as a professional activity, thus integrating function, process, and product-based teaching. Our procedures include a wide variety of tasks, activities, and projects. And for each of the teaching units designed by Maria Gonzalez Davis, she specifies the aims, the level of language proficiency, the type of grouping, the approximate timing, the material, and the steps needing to complete a given exercise. So, similar to Nord's and Bibi's methods, the pedagogic activities devised by Gonzalez Davis are monolingual and bilingual. but the order in which they are presented is random. Also, they include different types of written and oral translation, such as dialogue interpreting and interlinguistic, intersemiotic, or sight translation. What the three teaching methods have in common is the use of teacher-directed translanguaging as an integral part of translation pedagogy as a whole, which subsumes translation-oriented language learning and translation teaching. They don't actually use the term translanguaging, but they do apply it in practice. Now, as regards the similarity and difference between translanguaging in translator training and in bilingual education, we can affirm that classroom translanguaging is relevant in both of them. But while research into bilingual pedagogy is concerned with pupil-directed and teacher-directed translanguaging, translator education focuses entirely on teacher-directed translanguaging. Also, while the field of bilingual education avails itself of a variety of research methodologies, surveys, field, ethnographic and experimental studies, the empirical and systematic investigation of translator and interpreter training is arguably still in its infancy, as contended by Dorothy Kelly. So, to conclude, I will go back to the issue raised earlier about what translation and language educators can learn from each other in order to seize and rise to the opportunities offered by the current turn towards multilingualism in applied linguistics. My view is that we can share the knowledge and expertise we have gained in the theory and practice of teacher-directed translanguaging intended as an integral part of translation pedagogy, and this we can draw on the knowledge and expertise gained by language educators in the theory, research methodology, and practice of pupil-directed translanguaging in multilingual education. This mutual exchange would be a first step in promoting interdisciplinary cooperation, which in turn would foster the creation of a culture of translation education research and catapult language and translation pedagogy into the 21st century. And this is all from me. Thank you.